The Ottoman Turks began as a nomadic people from the steppe beyond the Aral Sea. For centuries they had wandered present-day Turkey looking for new pasture lands. Muslim sultans had enlisted them as mercenaries to fight off the Mongol hordes. But in the upheaval following the Mongol invasion, the Turks began to stake out their own territorial claims. From their ranks emerged a warlord of legendary ambition. His name was Osman Bey. It's said that Osman had a miraculous dream of a magical tree whose many branches foretold his siring a powerful lineage. The followers of Osman became known as Ottomans. They considered themselves warriors for the faith, or Ghazis, whose destiny was to bring Islam to the world. For the early Ottomans, the direction of expansion would always be to the west, for good reason. Osman's warriors moved to the north and west across the Anatolian plateau into territory controlled by the traditional Christian power in the area, the aging Byzantine Empire. By Osman's time, the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire was reaching the end of its age, dwindling to an isolated stronghold in Eurasia. The Crusaders had already wreaked havoc across the region on their way to Jerusalem, sacking the capital city and helping to reduce the once proud Byzantine Empire to a few small warring states. The Ottomans quickly overran these splintered Byzantine factions, uniting northwestern Anatolia into a single domain. In 1326, the Ottomans took the powerful Byzantine city of Bursa, a victory that would change the character of the Ottoman Turks forever. The restless nomads of the steppe would settle down to build an empire. Civilization meant organization, and the Ottomans set out to manage the vast regions they now controlled. Leaving the Byzantine clerks in place, they began to organize the new empire. First and foremost, taxation and record-keeping. The word bureaucracy has since lost its noble connotations. Yet this was a great innovation, as ambitious as any triumph in battle. In fact, the Ottomans had fewer conflicts with their Christian subjects than those of their own faith. Muslim adversaries intent on challenging Ottoman rule. This practice was called devshirme. The young boys were technically slaves of the Sultan, but they weren't treated like slaves. First, they were brought into the Muslim faith, taught rituals of washing and prayer, and the Arabic and Ottoman languages. This served a political as well as a religious purpose. Through the devshirme system, the Ottomans could create a caste without any conflicting loyalties to tribe or family. The Janissaries were the Sultan's elite infantry. It was an army that would set the standard for centuries to come. They were trained with all the precision and discipline, pomp and circumstance of a modern army. For the first time, an army wore uniforms and went into battle to the accompaniment of a military band. The Janissaries were the most feared troops in the Western world, a force that was worthy of this new Islamic empire and its restless visions of conquest. By the middle of the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire spread from present-day Turkey, known as Anatolia, deep into the Balkans, with one critical exception. To the Ottomans, Constantinople's strategic and economic importance was considerable. Its symbolic significance was even greater. It's said that the goal of laying claim to Constantinople was decreed by Muhammad himself. Every Ottoman ruler since Osman had wanted to seize the city, but it had always remained firmly in Christian hands. Then a sultan came to power whose dreams of conquest would not be denied. History would honor him as Mehmet, the conqueror. When he assumed the sultanate, he was only 12 years old, but he was already well versed in Ottoman politics. To remove any threat of competition for power, he had his half-brother strangled. Mehmet immediately set his sights on the one prize as grand as his ambitions. By the middle of the 15th century, the city was a shadow of its former self. The population had plummeted from 400,000 to a mere 50,000. But a besieging army would still be at a tremendous disadvantage. Constantinople was surrounded on 3 sides by water and massively fortified. It was encircled by a triple ring of walls nearly 100 feet high and 30 feet thick, and they had already stood for 1,000 years. But Mehmet had an answer for these walls. Earlier cannons had been assembled with strips of forged metal bound with hoops. They fired stone projectiles with little more power than a catapult. A new breed of cannons could be cast of solid bronze and packed with enough gunpowder to propel metal cannonballs with staggering force. But Mehmet was not staking his hopes on cannon alone. The mile-wide channel of the Bosphorus Strait was all that connected the city to the Black Sea. If he could cut it off, Constantinople would be at his mercy. Mehmet needed to construct a strategically positioned fortress to close the strait. He built it right in the shadow of the great city walls. It took less than 4 months to build a massive 7-towered citadel called Rumeli Hisar. Mehmet himself is said to have carried stones during its construction. No sooner was it completed than he tightened his noose around the neck of the Bosphorus. The first ship to defy his orders to stop was sunk, its crew decapitated and its captain impaled on the castle walls. To stop Mehmet's ships from approaching, the Byzantines strung a massive chain across the strait. On April 22nd, 1453, the besieged city watched in horror as Mehmet's troops hoisted 70 of his ships ashore, sliding them over land on greased planks past the barrier chain. More than 100,000 Ottoman soldiers now stood before the walls of Constantinople, braced for the greatest bombardment the history of warfare had ever known. Under relentless fire, the city's 7,000 Christian defenders held out for nearly a month. In desperation, the Byzantines who occupied the city appealed to their fellow Christians across the continent for help. At that time, the kings of Europe had military and political problems of their own. Constantinople would have to fend for itself. Shortly before dawn on May 29, 1453, the Turkish army breached the walls of the city. Within hours, Constantinople was in the hands of the Ottomans. Mehmet rode into the city and went straight to its most celebrated prize, the magnificent church of Hagia Sophia. Built by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, its name meant the Church of Holy Wisdom. It was the largest enclosed space in the world. Inside the church, a Turkish voice rose, proclaiming in Arabic the first pillar of Islam. There is no God but God. Muhammad is his messenger. The single greatest church in Christendom was now a mosque. The Hagia Sophia became the inspiration for all Ottoman domed mosques to come. But none would ever match its size and scope, and it belonged to Mehmet the Conqueror. News of his triumph sent shockwaves around the world.